Okay, welcome back after this coffee break to the last section of the last session of BLAST 2022. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Matteo De Ceglie, and he's going to talk about axiomatizing the class of offset theoretic multiverses. Matteo.
Hello, thank you very much for having me, even if only in this hybrid and online format, and hopefully you can all hear me decently enough. And I'm really sorry I couldn't make it, but I'm currently in Europe trying to finish up my dissertation, and you can imagine that a 12-hour flight and everything would put my advisor a little bit in a worried state. So today I will talk about a little bit of set theory, and especially the set theoretic multiverse. And I will try to introduce a way to talk about all the set theoretic multiverse in just one single set theory. And you can think of this step I'm trying to make like the one that was made in with universal algebra and universal logic, when from talking about all the single algebras or all the single logics in isolation, then we tried, and it was actually made to a single theory encompassing all of them. So, it's not, sorry. Okay, so today I will first give a little bit of preliminaries, some preliminary remarks on the set theoretic multiverse and universalism versus multiversalism debate. And then I will introduce the multiverse operator, that is the first stepping stone to such a universal and general theory of the set theoretic multiverses. And I will give you some basic definitions, and then I will try to define this class of all set theoretic multiverse. And at the end, I will try to sketch a little bit some further steps for this theory. So, starting off with the preliminary remarks. So usually we in the last 10 years or so, from Hampkins' seminal paper in 2012 on the set theoretic multiverse, we have a novel and very interesting debate that was divided between the advocates of universalism, and that's the standard position in set theory. And according to this position, there is just one single set theoretic universe, namely the cumulative hierarchy P. And this usually in the most radical, from the most radical perspective, this cumulative hierarchy is also not expandable in any way, neither in height by adding new ordinals or in width by adding new subsets. And this is usually called actualism, but we can also have a potentialist account of the cumulative hierarchy, but this is then getting more similar to the set theoretic multiverse from a certain point of view. So, and the alternative position is the pluralist position. This is the philosophical background of the development then of the mathematical set theoretic multiverses. And according to this position, we have actually several set theoretic universes, each one instantiating a different conception of set and membership. And we have several types of set theoretic multiverses. They are usually defined mathematically, but both mathematically and philosophically, and not every time the two definitions align. So, for example, we have the broad multiverse, and this was the one first developed by Hampkins. And according to Hampkins, this is the collection of all possible set theories and their models. Obviously, this is the maximal kind of definition of a multiverse. There is no way to encompass more set theories and models. Here, models and universes are usually synonymous in this context. So sometimes I will talk about models, or universes, but they are the same thing. then we can put some restraint and some constraint on the kind of universes that we allow or not allow in the in our set theoretic multiverse. So we have, for example, the set generic multiverse. This is the collection of all extension of a ground universe generated through set generic forcing. This was mainly developed by Steele and Boudin. Also Venturi wrote something about this. And obviously you can easily come up with variants of this kind of multiverse. So if you really like, for example, class generic forcing, you can have a multiverse, a class generic multiverse, or hyperclass generic multiverse, and so on. Then we have the hyperuniverse, and this is the collection of all countable transitive models of V that we define using the infinitary V logic, and this was developed by Friedman in Vienna, the Kurt Gödel Research Institute, by his group. And finally, we also have the parallel universes, and this is the collection of all possible instantiation of different concept of the power set operation. This was developed by Vannanen. And obviously, these are mainly the main types. We can have variants and other kind of, so as I said before, the set generic multiverse uses set generic forcing. We can have generic multiverses using different kind of forcing. So as you can see, all these different multiverses are very different kind of entities in mathematics, and there is it's not always easy to find common features between them. So, and this is actually my plan. So to develop a common environment for all these multiverses, so we can actually compare them and see whether they have common features, to see how they behave, and so on. So as we have seen, each of these multiverses has its own characterization, and mostly they have both a mathematical and philosophical characterization. So, for example, if we go back to the broad multiverse, philosophically, this is the collection of all possible set theories and their models. However, mathematically, this cannot be actually defined. Amkins actually provided some axioms for this multiverse, and that takes actually a subset of the collection of all countable transitive models of V, only the saturated ones. So since they have very different characterizations, mathematical characterizations especially, it's very difficult to actually compare them and assess their differences, because it's completely it's mostly impossible to compare them set generic multiverse and Amkins' definition of the multiverse. So my plan is to define this common environment. And this means defining the most basic characterization of the multiverses, hopefully a characterization that is common between all the different multiverses. This means then defining the multiverse operator. And finally, with this multiverse operator, I will try to define the structure of all set theoretic multiverses. So what's this multiverse operator then? So first of all, I have to give you some general features of a multiverse. Every multiverse I talked about, every multiverse is mainly composed by two features. They have a ground universe, and this is the starting point of the multiverse. All the other universes of the multiverse are generated from this universe using a particular generating method. And this generating method is the method that applied to the ground universe generates the whole multiverse. So for example, a ground universe could be V, or all the different kind of constructible universes, a countable model inside V, and so on. And then the generating method could be some kind of set of forcing of some way to define new models of set theory using strong logics, for example. So some axioms that define which universes are part of the multiverse and which aren't, and so on. And we can mix and match all of this. So the multiverse operators then takes these very two common features and put them together. So suppose that VK is a universe of set theory. Obviously, here from a technical point of view, I cannot talk directly about the whole and actual V. But we can avoid those problems by considering a potential instance and talking about the level of V. And so let VK be this universe of set theory and I a generating method. And so the multiverse operator MLT maps the universe of set theory, that will be the ground universe in this case, to the set theoretic multiverse MV generated through the method I apply to VK. So in this way, we can try to define the different set theoretic multiverses using this multiverse operator. So for example, the multiverse operator with the generating method broad, that is the set of axioms, perspectival axioms that Hampkins defines, when applied to any kind of V-like ground universe, will give me an Hampkins-like set Hampkins-like set theoretic multiverse. Sorry, that is a perspectival universe in which, for example, from a single universe in the multiverse, all the other universes seems just non-well-founded countable sets inside my universe. Then I move away, and this view changes. Or the set generic multiverse is the generatic method of set generic forcing plus the axioms that Stills gives about the on the multiverse, and this apply to any kind of V-like around the universe will give me set generic forcing a la Stills. On the other hand, if instead of the Stills axiom I use the multiverse laws and omega logic, as in Boodin case, the multiverse operators here will put me VK in correspondence with Boodin set generic multiverse. And hyperuniverse and the parallel universe work just in the same way. So essentially here we have that the triple MLT, so the multiverse operator with the generating method and the ground universe, define each single universe uniquely. However, each one of them is still its own separate entity. And I have done nothing at this point to actually define a common environment, right? This is because there is no common feature between all the triples MLT, I, and VK, just as there wasn't any common feature between all the single universes, multiverses. So the question would be, is it actually possible to define a single structure, let's call it MLT-VK, that encompasses all the set theoretic multiverses? So I propose that with the following axioms, we can actually define such an axiom. So that structure here, so I don't know whether you can see my cursor here. So I claim that this structure here satisfies all these axioms, and so all these axioms actually define that that structure. So a multiverse contains its own ground universe. So all the multiverses, so the multiverses are in the same relation as their ground universes. So if we have two ground universes in which the first one is, for example, an initial segment, let's say, of the second one, then if I apply the same generating method to both of them, the multiverse generated from the first one will be in the same relation to the second one. So inside the second one, just like the ground universes. And finally, iterating the generation of the multiverse doesn't escape the original multiverse. So if I have a multiverse and try to define a new multiverse using that multiverse as my ground universe, I'm not doing actually anything. I'm still in the same multiverse. And so, for example, we can see this in still set generic multiverse. So still set generic multiverse satisfies all those axes. So not going in too many details, we don't have enough time, but you can actually see this graphically. So the ground, this could be one. So still set generic multiverse is built in this way. We have our ground universe. We apply set generic forcing, and we build up in this way the first set generic extension, and so on. And obviously, when we take all of this at the same time, we find out that the ground universe is still there. It's contained by all of extensions. Obviously, if the ground universe is contained in another universe, for example, let's suppose here that we have V and the usual inner model L inside V, then the extension of the smaller ones, in this case L, are also containing the extensions of the bigger one. So if L is the inner model of V, the set generic multiverse defined on generated from L will be inside the set generic multiverse defined by the whole V. And finally, the iteration of the set generic multiverse is still in the set generic multiverse. So if we then take all of the set generic multiverse as my grand universe and define a new set generic multiverse from that, I'm still moving outwards from here. I'm not defining something completely different. And finally, this is my main claim and my main result here is that the structural MLT VK is a Stark structure. That is, for any generating method and for any ground universe, or for any set theoretic multiverse, the axioms that I defined before are all satisfied. How can you actually prove this? Well, you do this by in more details. You go through all the possible set generic multiverse. Since we have a finite number of possible ground universes, we have an infinite number of varieties, obviously, but they all behave in the same way. So each single VK, we don't need to check each one. That would be a problem. And especially the generating methods are finite. So we have all the types of forcing, we have all the types of strong logics to define set generic multiverse, and a reasonable amount of axioms that can help us, and that's it. So, however, this is just the first step. What I've done here is just defining a unified structure of all multiverses, but I have done nothing about comparing and categorizing them, its elements. So a further talk would be talk about how we can define different classes of multiverses using this multiverse operator. So maybe defining the difference between open and closed multiverses, or linear versus branching multiverses. Obviously, let's consider that all these kind of different classes are already present in the literature. However, in mostly a folkloristic kind of way. There is not a precise formal definition of this kind of classes. A further claim would be that my multiverse operator and the fact that forms a Tarski structure will help us formally defining all these different classes. And obviously, there are some open questions. So, for example, are there multiverses that don't satisfy the axioms given? Obviously, I claim that this is not the case. No, obviously, these are open questions. Could be that there are counterexamples on all of this. I also claim that we can use the multiverse operator to actually characterize the single universe. And however, the single universe, even when defined with the multiverse operator, doesn't satisfy all the axioms. In particular, it doesn't satisfy the third axiom. If you have questions on this, then I can give you more details And finally, we can also use the multiverse operator to define the actualist versus potentialist distinction. This is a very important distinction in the philosophy of set theory. However, as always, this is left mostly folkloristic and informal. But I do believe that with the multiverse operator and this Tarski structure, we can make things more precise. So just a very quick summary. There is a huge variety of set-theoretic multiverses, each one with its own mathematical characterization. There are some types here, sorry. They are all generated from one ground universe using a finite set of possible methods. And considering these two common features, it's possible to define the multiverse operator, mapping a universe of set theory to its corresponding multiverse, given a precise generating method. And this multiverse operator, then it's possible to define the Tarski structure that is the structure of all multiverses. And that was it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Matteo. Is there any questions in the audience? Yes.
So I'm a little bit confused about your theorem, because it seems to me that the statement of the theorem was exactly the same as your list of axioms.
So sorry, I cannot actually understand you very well from the.
Your theorem, the statement of your theorem that these multiverse operators satisfy or the
Yes.
structure. Isn't that statement exactly the same as your list of axioms?
Oh yes, so yes, of course.
Here,
right? Yeah, here I just wanted to put the axioms in another in another slides, and then the theorem is that the structure is a Tarski structure that is it. It satisfies all the axioms.
The proof is true.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Oh, thank you. I thought that Hampkin's multiverse didn't have a generating universe. Is that, am I mistaken? Can you explain that?
Okay, so Hampkin's multiverse is behead. It has two very different characterizations, right? So it has a philosophical characterizations that has no generating method and no ground universe. It simply says that everything is in there. However, from the mathematical point of view, this is of impossible characterization. So Hampkins provided in an article with Victoria Dittman from 2010 a set of axioms, and he says that all his multiverse satisfies all these axioms, and essentially these axioms carves out only the countable transitive saturated models of V. So here with generating method, I'm using those, I'm defining those Hampkins axioms.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Maybe someone on Zoom? Ah, here, there's another question.
Thanks. So you mentioned this single universe and that it does not fit into your scheme. Can you explain what the single universe is? And
yes, so I can go a little bit further. I have some appendix here. You can find three main references of all of this. So okay, so we can define the single universe in this way. So here we apply the generating method, that is set generic forcing, not to a whole VK, but to accountable transitive models inside V, as is usually done in with forcing. And in this way, we define an extension of that countable transitive model of force. However, why this doesn't satisfy the axiom 3? Because in this way, when I then reapply the generating method to MG, so to the extended countable transitive model, then I'm defining a new countable transitive model that is bigger than the previous one. So I can keep enlarging my my set theoretic multiverse. Sorry, that it's not actually a multiverse. So that axiom is not satisfied. Was it this one the question, or because I cannot see you. I'm really sorry. So all your questions are just in the void for me.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, then thank you, Matteo, again. Let's thanks, Matteo.
Thank you very much again, and sorry for this hybrid format.